This is Marketing Key Performance Indicators, an introduction to the concept of KPIs and how you can use them to monitor your business performance. My name is Neil Wilkins and I'll be taking you through this session. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the particular presentation that we're doing here today. So if you have any questions and you're in the live session, watching this and listening to this live, use the chat facility to include your questions, and I'll see if I can get around to answering those. If you're watching this on catch up because you weren't able to attend the live session, then feel free to use the message thread below this particular recording, and I will endeavour to answer your questions as soon as I see them. So, marketing key performance indicators. What actually are marketing key performance indicators? This is an important question that really helps us to kind of get to the heart of kind of really why we are doing what we're doing within marketing. And a key performance indicator is often mistermed, it's often misunderstood, and a lot of the time marketers view key performance indicators as either the goals themselves or as an objective, and they're neither of these things. A KPI, which is what we'll call them from now on, just to save me keep saying the phrase key performance indicator, a KPI is neither a goal nor an objective. It's actually a measure of progress towards something. Okay, and the key word here is obviously the word indicator. So it is a flag, it is a benchmark, it is a guide to how you are performing, but it's not the actual performance measure itself. And I think when we start out on this journey of understanding measurement and evidence and analytics and insights, we often sort of kind of term this particular phrase and often think that a KPI is actually the goal itself. It's not. It's an indicator of how we're progressing towards a particular goal. Now, KPIs, if we see these things as indicators, and we'll go into kind of exactly what we mean by those in a moment, they come in a variety of different shapes and guises. Now, sometimes we see a KPI as being something that's you might term leading. In other words, what we're looking for is some kind of indicator that is a predictor of the future. So it's a predictor of the success that we might have in the future. So it's some kind of indicator of how we're progressing towards a successful endpoint. Or it could be the inverse of that. It's a way of monitoring and measuring failure, either in a system or in a process. So it can be leading if it's some kind of predictor of the future. We can also use KPIs in a lagging sense. In other words, we can use these to retrospectively look back and see actually what happened or what basically happened within a project or a campaign or some kind of business activity. And this is very much seen retrospectively after the event, and we would call that a lagging KPI. And there's also one that is very much more considered really in sort of real time, which is actually watching change happen at the same time and in the same direction as the project progresses. In other words, seeing some kind of, you might term it sort of traffic light indication of the progress of a particular project. So we're not looking at it as a predictor, we're not looking at it as some sort of indicator of what's happened, we're actually using it as a sort of an ebb and flow of the energy of a project or of a system or of a technology that we're looking to implement. So there's lots of different ways that we can consider this term key performance indicator or KPI. Now, there's some really interesting definitions when you look into the whole kind of subject of KPIs. What you realize is that you can create and set up indicators across a whole range of different things that you do in your day-to-day activities, either strategically and or tactically. And I particularly love this definition from the KPI Institute. Selecting KPIs is like picking flowers, but not necessarily picking all of them. And basically what we need to try and do here is to decide on the right combination of these flowers, and maybe a limited number of these flowers, to make what the KPI Institute describe as a beautifully balanced bouquet. In other words, there are literally billions of combinations of things that you could set up as indicators of how you're progressing and how you're performing. But the real art of this is to use your instincts, is to use some kind of prioritization, and to use some kind of measures of success and actually define what success looks like. And we'll look at that in a little bit of time. And actually figure out, if I could only measure maybe half a dozen things or maybe 10 things, what would those things be? So it's very much about creating a balance of KPIs that actually allows you to, and I guess in lots of ways, keep your finger on the pulse of the performance of how you are doing. So this isn't KPIs as in a set of goals. This isn't KPIs as in a set of objectives. This is not necessarily just looking backwards and looking at reporting. This isn't necessarily looking forwards and just, prediction of the future or monitoring kind of exactly where we are today. It's all of the above. So it's all of these things and trying to figure out for your organization actually what makes the most sense to be in your dashboard, if you like, or in your set of measures that you're looking to create indicators for. Now, if you think back of the actual phrase key performance indicator, KPI, it's very, very important to remember that first word. We often kind of gloss over these kind of phrases and just think, oh yeah, I understand what a KPI is. It's not until we actually think of those individual words that it suddenly becomes really clear and really obvious what we should be focusing in on. And of course, remember that key, that K at the start of KPI, is about looking at your key indicators. Okay, so this is really to focus in on what the business really values, because that is key. And so creating some indicators of, if I could only measure a small number of things, if I could only watch a small number of things, if I could only monitor a small number of things for my business, on behalf of my business, from marketing or maybe in a wider context, what would those things be? So what does my business really value? What are those things in my business that are the highest priority, the things that would be a make or break scenario, because I need to create some indicators against those to show how we are progressing. So what are KPIs not? Well, they're not the final answer. These are not the final report on a particular scenario, project or campaign or marketing strategy. These are indicators of how you're progressing from A to B, from the start to the end, from first quarter to second quarter, in this year or maybe next year. These are indicators of progress. That's what they are. So they don't give you the final answer. They're not the final report. These are not the things that are turning the information you receive into intelligence that can inform better decisions, but they do inform where you need to be putting your attention. Okay, so if, for example, you have 10 key performance indicators in your business, and these are flags, indicators, monitoring systems or processes that just flag up to you whether things are going well, whether things are okay and neutral, or whether things are going wrong. These indicators allow you to make informed decisions as to what you're going to do next, as to how you're going to remedy any issues or challenges, or if things are going particularly well, how you can do more of what you're doing. So they're indicators of attention. They're not the end game and the end numbers themselves. The numbers back them up and inform these key performance indicators, but the indicators are just that. They're indicators of progress and actually how you're doing. So of course, they need to be based on something. So typically they are going to be based on the kinds of things that you're measuring as an organization. And as we've said, key things that you're measuring. So key priority indicators, you could argue that these are called. So the kind of performance that you're going to be looking at can be qualitative, or it can be quantitative. In other words, it can be softer, more subjective things, or it can be more objective, financial kind of things, or sales kind of things. And in a lot of cases, you might say, well, to be accurate, these things have got to be highly measurable and precise and particularly accurate and very, very tangible. And yeah, to some extent, that is correct, that is fine. But you can also have indicators that are based around opinion, or a kind of a collective view from within your organization as to how things are progressing towards a particular goal. So it may well be that you're taking more sort of anecdotal evidence from maybe the sales force or maybe from customer service. So some of it could be very measurable and, highly targeted and focused, but some of it can be based upon opinion. And the more qualified that opinion, or the broader the range of people that you're sampling to get that opinion, the better. So it is about a mix, and there is no one size fits all, and there is no one single right or wrong definition of how you do this. But we just need to remember these are indicators of a process. These are indicators of progress. They're not the end game in themselves. But having said that, what we're really probably, as marketers, on the lookout for are indicators that are pretty smart. So they're quite specific, ideally measurable, as we've just said, that they should be achievable or attainable. In other words, we want to be able to, measure these things on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a one-time activity. The access of information to feed into our indicator needs to be something in there that can be used and accessible to us on a regular or ongoing basis. They've obviously got to be kind of realistic. I mean, there's no point in trying to set up an indicator that we simply can't measure, either because it's too expensive or that it's just inaccessible. And of course, the kinds of indicators that we're talking about here as high priority ones need to be very timely. They need to be timely and time bound so that they're able to deliver attention and direction, and inform our decisions on the basis of being valuable to the business. So yeah, we can base them around sort of binary or absolute yes or no kinds of measures. But basically what we're looking at here is for some kind of sort of comparative situation. In other words, if we've got an indicator that's starting to show some kind of comparison between where we are today and the future, or where we are today versus maybe something like a budget, or maybe an expectation of how this plan or this project is going to roll out, then we've got an opportunity here to do some comparisons. So often KPIs are used as a little bit of evidence to the business and a little bit of evidence to the management team to say, okay, this is how we're performing compared to a situation that we expected or an anticipated outcome. So they allow us to make those kind of judgments versus something, and that's really quite important. Now, if you've listened to any of my other sort of webinars, or you've watched some of the stuff that I've produced before, you'll know that I'm very, very fond of trends, that I'm not a huge fan of kind of snapshots in time, because I always think those are potentially quite misleading. So I'm always after trends. And so this would be, if you follow that philosophy, it would be creating some indicators that monitor and measure and collect and then present information across a period of time. And often we see the kind of key performance indicators based around kind of systems or process performance being based around trends. In other words, we see maybe this is a customer delivery of a product or a service, and we monitor the delivery over time. So we're looking at a trend. So is our trend of speed of delivery to a customer, for example, is that increasing or decreasing? And if it goes beyond certain boundaries, either fast or low, then basically those indicators will flag up and sort of maybe turn from green to amber. And then if we're way outside of our expected trend, maybe then they turn to red. And of course, it's those things then that are creating an attention on those particular indicators. Not they're giving us the answer, but they're flagging up, hey, we've moved outside of a boundary that we expected. So, okay, now you've got my attention. What are you going to do about it? So they're not giving the answer. They're just indicating to the organization something's up. And it could be a positive or it could be a negative, but something's gone beyond what we expected, what we anticipated, or a trend spectrum that we would normally expect. So the indicator just brings to your attention that something is going outside of the norm. And that's really where we start to take these things. And of course, if we can align these KPIs with what we might term key success factors or even critical success factors, then by focusing on that word success, if we can align and decide what success looks like, either to our marketing management or to the wider business management, then we can align key performance indicators with key success factors. So we can say, look, business, you're telling us that this particular factor is a really key measure of how successfully we're performing. And so I need now an indicator that shows me how I'm performing versus that key success factor. So it might be we have an expectation as a business to have a customer satisfaction score of 98%. Just taking a random example here. Now, of course, if we have a key performance indicator that says, okay, within that 98% key success factor, if we drop below 95% or if we go above 99%, then an indicator kind of flags up to us, hey, something's up, then that would be a nice alignment of a KPI with a key success factor. So the business says the critical thing that we want to know is that we're hitting this target of 98% or 95% or whatever that number is of customer satisfaction. If we've then got a range of KPIs, so a spectrum of this KPI that says plus or minus, I don't know, 5%, something like that. If it goes beyond that, then we get this flag. So the indicator says, hey, I'm going to shout now, I'm going to sort of draw to your attention, we've gone beyond the boundary of what success looks like, because that was our target. What are you now going to do about it? So it doesn't help you do the doing, doesn't help you do something about it. It just is an indicator of your performance. And of course, why have KPIs to do this? Well, because it allows you to share in a hopefully an open and honest way how your performance is tracking over time. And KPIs can be very much a bonding tool within an organization. So these aren't the end targets, these aren't the kind of definable things you're going to be measured on, or if you're in a sort of sales and marketing environment, which is bonus, these aren't going to be the things that will decide whether or not you get a bonus at the end of the year. What they are little indicators that allow you to have conversations, because if your green score moves into amber or into red, it opens up hopefully honest dialogue across the organization that says, hey, we've changed, something has moved here. So we've got this little indicator on the graph, or this little flag pops up that says we've now got to create a meeting here, we've now got to review our process or review what we're doing. So it is an enabler, it's a focus of attention, and it's something that flags up to you that something has moved outside of the norm that you've expected for the project or the campaign or the plan that you have. And so what it brings to you, really, is hopefully some clarity. It brings to you some level of control. It allows you to continuously improve. I'm a huge fan of this, well, it's almost cliche now, continuous improvement, but I think it's so important that we always have that as a bit of a mantra for what we do. And KPIs allow you to continuously improve because they're always there monitoring that status quo, monitoring that kind of neutral scenario. And if things go positive, we can learn. If things go negative, then maybe we need to evolve or pivot the project or the campaign. And of course, one of the most important reasons that we have KPIs is to potentially reduce bottleneck in our, say, customer journey, for example. So if we find that we've got key performance indicators at certain points in our customer journey, and I always start with that really as an example from a marketing perspective, one of the really important uses of KPIs is that if we've actually got there KPIs at the critical points in the customer journey, and I'll show you an example in just a moment of that, then basically if things aren't actually flowing through to the end point, in other words, if customers aren't getting to the conversion point or they aren't then being retained, rather than just saying, hey, we've got everything wrong, it allows us at a very granular level of detail to be able to backtrack and say, hey, look, there's a KPI there, about a third of the way through the awareness to conversion phase, there's a little KPI there that's turned from green to amber. So what's happening there? We've gone outside of the expected outcome that we would have at that point. Why? Maybe we've not got enough people coming through, so why? And it allows us then to constantly clearly define what the outcomes might be. It allows us then to, in a very kind of verifiable and evidence-based way, be responsive be very timely with the way that we kind of then, reinvent that point in that particular bottleneck of the customer journey, for example, and then really understand how that then has a knock-on effect into the rest of the journey. So for me, that's one of the key kind of marketing reasons as to why we would want this kind of clarity, because rather than just saying, hey, that project or that campaign didn't work, we can actually say, well, where were the weaknesses? Where were the opportunities for that continuous improvement? And those little indicators, they're those little flags, they're those little things that are just kind of monitoring along in the background. Something moves beyond where we expect it to be, little flag, little indicator comes on, and we can then go and do some proper activity in there to address it. So here's an example then from the marketing perspective of the customer journey. Within the customer journey, as we know, we have a number of different touch points with our customer. Some of those will be digital touch points, some of those physical to real world touch points. And as we go through this customer journey, holding our customer's hand from the awareness phase all the way through to the conversion and beyond into the retention phase, where we're stimulating that loyalty and hopefully advocacy in the future, at each of those steps in that journey, there are some obviously significant points where key decisions are being made. Now, I would always recommend that at some of those key decision points where your customer is actually making choice, where your customer is deciding, do I go for product A or product B? Or your customer is deciding, actually, do I want your organization or do I want your competitor? Or the customer is deciding, actually, is this price right for me? Yes, it might be, or maybe it isn't, and I'm not seeing the value from it. Or it's about building that kind of faith and trust before they convert. All of these key touch points that you have, and I would say these are kind of critical touch points, I would suggest that they at least have an opportunity for having a key performance indicator put in place at those points, because the critical path through your customer journey, not the nice to do bits, some of the kind of stuff that's around the periphery, but these are the critical path points. If you can put little indicators on those, then if people are failing to come through the customer journey, you'll see the little indicators will come up as little flags at those critical points, and will say, hey, this point, it's a problem, this point's an issue. And maybe it is that the call to action you had at that particular point on your website wasn't clear enough. Or maybe you did some social activity and didn't quite get the tone of voice right, so people didn't click through or they didn't engage with it. All those little kind of touch points, I mean, they're tiny little details, but they can be the make or break of your customer journey. So why not start to consider putting little indicators in there, set some expectations. If the number that you expect to get through is 10, maybe your range for your key performance indicator is between, say, 8 and 12. And as long as it's between 8 and 12, then averagely you're going to probably get 10 through. But if it drops down to 4, the flag comes on. If it goes up to 20, the flag also comes on, because you're overperforming against your expectation. So having a spectrum of a range, if you like, of your key performance indicator at each of these critical points in the journey can really advise and help you make decisions as to how you're going to take this thing forward. It's not just the customer journey, though. We can often see the balanced scorecard, which is a way that we sort of get a really nice view of how an organization is performing from a range of different perspectives. And again, we can use key performance indicators in here. So these aren't the actual targets themselves, but these are measures or indicators of how we're performing versus those targets. And again, this is where, and I've mentioned it a couple of times already, where we potentially can put sort of color-coded stuff in here. So we could say that if everything is on track and we're aiming towards these targets by year end, and if everything is kind of as expected, then everything shows up as green. If maybe we're sort of 2 or 3 percentage points above or below our target sort of tracking, maybe then it turns to amber. And then if we're way outside of the expected range to be able to hit our targets, maybe the indicator then turns to red. Now, with a balanced scorecard, which is often used in team meetings or management meetings to give a nice kind of holistic overview of the organization, if we're using our KPIs in this form, of course, if we're presenting things in a green, amber, red sense, where's your eye drawn? Well, your eye is instantly, as a decision maker, drawn to the reds. And of course, that is the point, because red in the traffic light scheme is stop. And of course, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to draw attention, as we've said earlier, to the points in our balanced scorecard, which considers everything from customer and process to resources and financial performance. So a nice balanced view of how we're performing. But if we spot that there are certain areas that are flagged up as red because they're outside of the boundary that we set for our key performance indicators, then it's a great opportunity then for the management team or for the marketing team to sit around the table and figure out, what are we going to do about this? What is this indicator telling us? Let's do a deep dive into that particular issue and figure out why it's gone beyond the boundaries that we've set. So it allows you then to prioritize your focus based on your progress towards your targets. So rather than just looking happily at, oh, look, there's our big targets for the end of the year, and yeah, everything kind of feels fine, this allows you to do deep dive, granular, proper tactical, forensic interrogation of your numbers and of your performance and the resources behind them. So I'm a big advocate of balanced scorecard, and we can put KPIs into balanced scorecard as well. I guess from this sort of perspective is, what would be in your balanced scorecard? I mean, depending obviously on your part in the organization and the kind of role, the kind of projects that you're working on, the nice thing about balanced scorecard, if you're going to take this color-coded KPI route, is that you can pretty much put anything into your balanced scorecard that you like. It's this is the first time you've really come across balanced scorecard. It's well worth searching this and look at some of the examples when you see the search results. Click on images and you'll see a lot of templates and a lot of frameworks for balanced scorecard. And if you look for the ones that have got this traffic light scheme, you'll find that's a really nice, neat way of encapsulating really pretty much everything that we're talking about here with KPIs. So what would be on your balanced scorecard? What are the kind of things that resonate for you in terms of these key success factors? Because against those key success factors, what are the things that are your indicators as to how well you're performing against them? So are these things like finance? Are these things like product and service sales? Is it a revenue thing? Is it more around the people? So is it an HR thing, or is it training and support? Is it more of an operational thing? So operations, systems, and some of that kind of sort of management and governance side of things, or anything else. I mean, you can create a balanced scorecard around a particular campaign, for example, but the point of this is that it's balanced. Okay, so from within marketing, we're often targeted with performance against, say, digital targets or against sales and revenue targets, working in line with sales. We're often targeted with performance against things like sort of product and service. But it's about creating some sort of balance there, because we can't do those things in isolation. So the best KPIs take a nice balanced view, and that's where I always come back to this balanced scorecard and putting into there the 4 key areas that really resonate with the critical success factors that you're being rated on. And perhaps if you're coming at this from a pure marketing perspective, is that you can create some KPIs that align with your marketing mix. So you can look at the people, the process, the product, the profit, the promotion, and any of the other P's that are relevant to you in terms of what you're doing. And of course, this is all about having that kind of ongoing tracking and measurement going on, so that you can then carry on with your day-to-day activities, knowing that these little flags, that these little graphs, these little reports are going to be there, just flagging up when things go beyond what you have expected, in both a positive or maybe in a negative direction. And so taking all of that together, how then would you take that back to the business? Well, there are many, many ways that you can actually present this. And I particularly sort of like this one little example from spreadsheetshop.com, which is the way that you can create some form of dashboard. There are literally millions of ways that you could create a dashboard for this. But I would always say that, bear in mind that traffic light scheme. It's a very simple concept, that kind of red, amber, green. It's just very, very kind of logical that that would work for most businesses and organizations. You can, of course, use simple graphing, where your key performance indicator shows the boundaries of that kind of spectrum of performance that you expect, and then maybe it turns to red, a graph line that goes beyond what you're expecting. And you can also use infographics. I would say this is kind of like an infographic, where you're looking at maybe some little pie charts, some little indicators of percentage performance against where your target actually is. And of course, if you're well under percentage, then again, it turns from amber to green, from green to amber, and maybe to red if you're way outside. You can certainly be adding in here some tables, but I always think the more visual you can make this, both for yourself, but also for the people that you're reporting to or that you're briefing, I think the more visual you can make this kind of thing, the more powerful it's going to be. So there is no one size fits all when it comes to key performance indicators, but the things to remember, the really key things to remember, are that these are your key performance indicators, so the high priority ones. You don't really want any more than 10, probably 5 to 6 is going to be the real key sort of high priority ones for you. Remember, these are not the absolute results. These are indicators of how you're progressing to your absolute end game results. Remember always with key performance indicators to put in a spectrum. So you put in plus or minus a number or plus or minus a percentage outside of your target, and that's what your indicator's reporting on. Remember, you can use these kind of indicators to predict into the future how things are going to turn out, or you can use them retrospectively, a little bit like the example we have here of the dashboard, where you're kind of reporting on progress that's actually already happened. But make it balanced. Maybe start off with something that's a little bit more familiar if you're coming at this from a marketing and customer perspective. Maybe use the customer journey and think of that critical path. Think of that critical pathway through your customer journey and put some indicators in there, things that you're familiar with. But once you've got your head around that, I would say quickly get to a balanced scorecard approach, where you're looking at the context of the organization, what it defines as success, and then you're reporting back indicators of how you are performing versus that organizational definition of success. Because ultimately, if this is truly a key performance indicator, it has to be aligned with a critical success factor. So that's kind of pretty much all I wanted to sort of present and talk to you about. So I'd be very happy to take some questions. Won't be probably able to answer all of them, but I've had one or two come through already. First question that's come through here, which was, can I recommend any KPI dashboards? I think, to be honest, if you do a Google search, you will find many examples. One that I sort of particularly fond of is you can find at simplecki.com. There are a lot of services and a lot of platforms already set up that give you really good examples and some good case studies. So simplecki.com is a really nice one there. Next question was, can I use Excel as a dashboard? I have seen that done, and in fact, actually, I've you just think there was a website, I think it was called geekdashboard.com. So if you want to search geekdashboard.com, I'm sure that was what it was called, which was one that was very much lots of different examples, not just purely marketing KPIs, but very much broader sort of business KPIs. And I think from memory, that was all about using Excel as the basis of it. So obviously, you can subscribe to a variety of different kind of online platforms, sort of cloud-based, where your numbers would feed in and then they'll give you the KPI dashboard. But I think those were templates, particularly and predominantly for Excel, that would allow you to sort of have your data then sort of output as a series of dashboards based on both balanced scorecard but a whole variety of other different formats. So I would say probably have a look at that, and I think it was geekdashboard.com, and there were certainly some examples in there. Another question come through which says, should I start with a customer journey KPI? Well, I would say yes. I mean, obviously, the starting point is that you need to have done your customer journey and plotted that out across the three phases of customer journey: awareness, conversion, and retention. If you haven't already done that and you want to watch the customer journey webinar in the same series as this webinar, that'll give you a bit more of an idea and a little bit more detail of the three phases and kind of why you have to monitor kind of end to end the customer journey. But I think certainly putting, yes, I mean, I would agree. And I think maybe this question was raised just before I covered the point about maybe starting with customer journey for your KPIs. I mean, I think it's really important to start somewhere that's familiar, to really get your head around what a KPI really will do for you and the value that it'll bring, because I think that's really quite a nice one. So I would say search customer journey KPIs and you get a whole range of them. I know that there's a good one or a good set of them at MindTouch, mindtouch.com. Where I saw quite a few good sort of customer journey KPIs in the past, but you can do a sort of broader search if there isn't one there that really sort of matches your customer journey. But I would certainly say start with the customer journeys that you've plotted out, and then figure out where the key absolutely critical points are that are kind of almost those make or break decisions, because those potentially are going to be your biggest bottlenecks, and it's those bottlenecks you want to have those indicators, so you always get that early warning, that early alert, just in case obviously things don't quite work out as they might. Another question, can I measure people performance using KPIs? You absolutely can. I've seen quite a lot of work on this, and you can do some research for yourself if sort of people performance and sort of internal comms is more your thing. If it is, there's a very good resource and sort of like a specialist in this area called Stacey Barr. Staceybarr, I think is how you spell Stacey Barr. So staceybarr.com. And Stacey basically takes you through the whole range of kind of people KPIs, as I say, from a sort of an internal comms perspective, all the way through to actually using, yes, them in a sort of a broader kind of sense. Another question, are marketing KPIs most effective for larger projects, or can they be used for projects of any size? Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, I think, to be honest, I mean, they can be used anywhere that you need something flagged whilst you're carrying on with the day job. And I think that's the way I always kind of view it, is that if there's anything that has got a smart target associated with it, so this could be, I don't know, your next week's social media content, for example, that you're publishing down at a very, very tactical level, saying that would be a very small project. You might decide actually you want some indicators when you go beyond, certain parameters for engagement on your next week's content. So, you could set up some indicators for something like that. So, yeah, I mean, it certainly can be used at a very, very sort of tactical local level. I think the key thing is just to keep remembering these are key things, but they don't necessarily have to be key performance indicators. They're performance indicators, really. I mean, if you have a limited amount of time, I'd say prioritize, have them as KPIs. But if you just want them as PIs, in other words, just performance indicators, just be thinking, what would I like to be tracking in the background whilst I'm not able to put my attention to it, that would flag up and give me some attention if things go beyond parameters that I'm setting in advance. And I think that would be the key way to think about these things, is that they're almost like your little helpers in the background. And then if something changes and you're not quite sort of aware of it because you're too busy doing other stuff, and then it turns from green to amber and you think, hey, oh, there's something moving there. And so, these kinds of performance indicators will allow you to do that. And in essence, really, it is all about keeping control. This is not about something that happens as a once a month activity. This is not something that happens where, you just come back at the end of the month and start to think about you know, actually doing, you know, sort of one-time activities as you create your monthly report. This is very much more about actually spending time on a regular or kind of ongoing basis, so that you can keep some really, really good control over the projects or campaigns that you have. And I think for me, that is the essence of KPIs. They're your little helpers. They're focused on the things that are going to really sort of make or break the campaigns or projects that you do, and they allow you to take that early warning so you can make good decisions and you can focus on continuous improvement in everything that you do. And so for me, that kind of sums up really what they're about. They're helping you with that continuous improvement, helping you to report back how you're progressing towards that end game of the end results at the end of the project or campaign. And so you use them as your little friends, as those little flags that just kind of help that process along. So thank you for those questions, really good ones actually, sort of nice sort of balanced set there. If you have any others that sort of come to mind as you're either sort of watching this on catch up, or if you have any sort of after this live event, use the message thread below the recording and just send those questions through to me, and I'll endeavour to answer them as soon as I can. So this has been Marketing Key Performance Indicators. Thank you very much for coming along to this session, spending the time to hear a little bit about how KPIs can help you in your day-to-day marketing activity. We'll hopefully catch up again on a webinar very, very soon. Have a great day, and thank you very much for coming again.